Signal live here at block number 632,901. All right, you can join us on the Swan Signal chat room and follow along, ask questions of our guests today, t.me/Swan Signal. Broadcast is also available on YouTube, youtube.com/c/Swan Signal. Got a brand new, gorgeous looking page, new art from our designer, Jorn Roeder. I'm watching on the YouTube chat as well, so you can ask questions there. If you're already over there, please subscribe, like the video now to help us get it out there. These live sessions are also published in audio at swansignalpodcast.com. All right, in any case, let's get going here. Thanks for joining us today for the discussion. We have two great guests, Alex Gladstein, Chief Strategy Officer of the Human Rights Foundation and the Oslo Freedom Forum. Alex, welcome, man. Thanks for joining.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
All right, and we've got Matt Odell, co-host Tales from the Crypt. Matt is the first Swan Signal Live repeat guest. He was on with John Carvalho back a few episodes ago, so welcome back, Matt.
Oh, shit, I didn't realize that. Awesome.
Yeah.
Let's go.
Yeah, let's do this. Okay, let's start. I mean, obviously, you know, the topic at hand here and why we wanted to bring both of you guys in for this particular week. The protests, riots, civil unrest all around America. It's spreading to all around the world now. From a human rights lens, Alex, can you talk us through the present situation we find ourselves in?
Yeah, I mean, look, as an American, just to talk about that for a second, obviously Americans are very upset about the government and about the police in particular, and about the system at large. I think there's a lot of reasons for that. There's 40 plus million unemployed as a result of government policies and corporate mismanagement and bad decision making. There are a lot of people out there who are peacefully protesting. I would say the virtually most, almost everybody is out there with a legitimate grievance of one kind or another. And in the same way that you had in Hong Kong, where you had a lot of people, millions of people protesting for their rights and freedoms, and because they were upset at the establishment, what ends up happening is that a subset of those people are violent and they loot stuff. And then that becomes kind of the way that the establishment tries to paint the protests. They say, oh, like, these are just a bunch of bad people who are up to no good and they're breaking shit. And therefore they're all like not legitimate. And this is just, I see this around the world in every dictatorship, which is why it's really weird to happen in the United States. But look, at the end of the day, these people have real grievances. They're pissed off at the economic system. They're pissed off at the political system. They're pissed off at the police system. And they want to see some change. That's very different, though, from what's happening in Hong Kong and other countries. And it's actually kind of beautiful to see America rise up and for there to be peaceful protests in like hundreds of cities, because that can't happen in China or in Russia or in, Saudi Arabia or Cuba or many countries around the world. So while we still have our freedoms, we should exercise them. And it's important for people to know when they go out and protest that they should do certain things so they're not spied on and so that they aren't micro-tracked, et cetera. I'm sure Matt can speak to more of that. But it's interesting now we talk about the technology of protest as well. It becomes more important. And folks in Hong Kong have already been, they're way ahead of us on this. And that's one reason they wore a lot of masks in the last year was because they didn't want to be seen by facial recognition. So I think there's like legitimate grievances around the world against a system that is rigged. And people are protesting in different ways.
Matt, man, it's crazy times. I know you're writing it out. Got out of the city for this reason, not just for the pandemic, but also for the civil unrest that you feared might come about. Here it is. How you feeling, and what are you seeing out there?
Well, I mean, Alex said it better than I can ever say it. He's really eloquent with the way he describes these movements. I think that people like George Floyd's murder was absolutely the spark that set this all off. And it was, horrible, completely horrible, and representative of all the injustice that we see on a day-to-day basis in this country and across the world. But to me, this, just to echo what Alex said, I mean, to me, this feels global. This feels long overdue. It feels like, we saw all these protests around the world. all these different countries before anything, really happened in America. And then you had the coronavirus response, where it strongly favored the elite rich class in how it was handled. And you had the working class out of jobs, scared, not allowed to work. The benefits that came to them were minimal in comparison to what happened with the wealthier class. They saw the stock market going back up and all of that. 3 months of lockdown in some of these states. So then you mix all that together, and it was a powder keg. So I think you look at this unrest, and you have to ask yourself, like, and you have an administration that is instead of going the empathy route, they're going the complete opposite. They're going the authoritarian route. They're going, we're going to crush you. We're going to bring in the military. We're going to do all this different stuff, which just elevates it all. So then you ask yourself, I ask myself, what stops, what de-escalates the situation? And there's no simple thing you can point to. Like, I think they could start with arresting the other 3 officers that were involved in George Floyd's murder, which they haven't done yet. But I don't think that doesn't stop it. I feel like it's way bigger than that. It's people have had enough. They're helpless. They feel helpless. They feel powerless. They have nothing to lose. People have nothing to lose, and this is the result.
Yeah, actually, I think I totally agree with that, and I think that the situation we're in right now is not new, and there's always been police brutality, and remember Rodney King? Some of us are old enough to remember that, the Rodney King beatings and the violence and the violent protests that happened afterwards. This stuff is old. It's become more and more in the limelight because of social media, and that's a good thing. I think it's helping expose the authoritarianism that does go down in this country, and I think that we've had an escalation in, like, the police themselves, right? They went from like dudes walking around with batons to like guys in full body armor with assault rifles. That's an escalation and militarization of police that is very hard to roll back. It's not about they can prosecute this 1 cop or these 3 cops, or they can even prosecute 100 cops. It's not going to change that the fundamental nature of the police has changed over the last several decades. And how do we even claw our way out of there? Because we're really just headed towards some serious authoritarianism. And I know in China, I've seen some videos of how China handled the virus, for example. They've got guys, walking around with guns. They've got, infrared cameras scanning for people's temperatures. You could easily go that route, and technology is pushing us that way. It's not clear how do we like claw ourselves out of that. The TSA is not going to get repealed anymore. It's here to stay. Militarized police is kind of here to stay. How do we get out of that mess is very unclear to me.
Yeah, I was just going to ask about that. We as Bitcoiners understand that money has been really important to creating this in the environment in which we find ourselves, that, this powder keg, as Matt put it. How do we talk about Bitcoin in this time to help people understand that money and central banking has, helped create this inequality and the situation we find ourselves in now?
I like to think of it as part of the anti-authoritarian toolkit. So the first thing to mention is just that the camera is so powerful. The reason why you have millions of people on the streets, it's not like they were fine 2 weeks ago. They've been upset, and this has just translated their anger into action by seeing the brutal murder of George Floyd, right? On taken by a camera phone, right? So the camera phone is a weapon in many ways, and it's a way where we can spy on our rulers, and we can spy on the police, and we need to take advantage of that. And I think it's great that cameras are now cameras with phones are now super cheap, and they're in the hands of like almost everybody. And as long as we we all understand we're being watched. That's one thing. But the censorship piece is almost the more important piece. In China, such an incident would be, they have the algorithms and the surveillance machinery tied together with censorship machinery in a way where, like, if someone takes a photo of something, it can quickly get kind of just like erased from public memory. It's not perfect, but they do a pretty good job of it. That doesn't happen in America. Like, we're all talking about it. Like, Twitter's open season. We're like late night television and public television. Everything is just about George Floyd right now, which is the way it should be, right? So the camera is a weapon, right? In the anti-authoritarian toolkit. So is encrypted messaging. I mean, it's super important that we can now send private messages to each other. Sure, the authorities can see the metadata on something like Signal. They can't read what we're saying unless our phones have been compromised. Things like Tor, VPN. And then I think Bitcoin is like in that toolkit. It's a very important piece of that toolkit. I don't think people will quite grasp how important it is to that toolkit for a little while, generally, like in the public. But to have money that we can transact with each other in a way that's sovereign and private, relatively private, increasingly private, is a big deal, I would say.
No doubt, no doubt. Matt, how do we talk about Bitcoin right now? We have sort of the spotlight on us, or at least I think we will increasingly so in this moment that Bitcoin was designed for. How do we help get the message out that the money is a big part of this problem?
I think we need to be very careful with, people are hurting right now. People are really hurting. They're on the streets fighting for their rights, fighting to be heard. And we need to be very careful about, I've seen a lot of takes, for instance, on Twitter that they're out of touch, like no one wants to read Bitcoin fixes this right now. I understand the nuanced argument, money is at the root of, we have this corrupt system, it's all there, but you have to be conscientious of the situation that people are in. And I would go on the opposite side too. No one wants to hear from someone who's, living in the boonies, who left the city and is like, burn it all down, fuck you as well. Like you can't be out of touch here. And money is a long-term play, right? Fixing the money is a long-term play. It's not something that's going to, heal these wounds today. So it is one aspect of what we really need to see, which is reform on a global level. Like we need to see, we have watched, partially led by America, over the last 40 years, inequality hit levels that it hasn't been at, since the Great Depression, since the Roaring 20s. And we need to be, and it's going to take a lot of work. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen overnight. And hopefully Bitcoin is that opt-out mechanism that will allow us to do it without trying to play this rigged game. But I just, for me personally, when all this was going, when this whole weekend started to unfold and stuff, like I took a step back from Twitter. Like I took a step back, spent time with my family and my friends. And I, just tried to hold on to, what's really important. Like life is short. What's really important, we don't need all this number go up, Bitcoin fixes this, all this shit right now. At least in America, like, if you're a European Bitcoiner or something like that, like, feel free to continue shit posting. But it just seems really out of touch. You gotta be careful about it. That's all I'm saying.
And I hear that.
Yeah, I think you made a very good comment about this is a long-term play. Like I always like to say, not Bitcoin fixes this, but Bitcoin could have prevented this. I have my own history when I left the Soviet Union with my parents, that we were, not allowed to keep our money. So Bitcoin obviously couldn't fix our situation retroactively, but it could have potentially prevented it if it had existed, 25 years prior. So while Bitcoin can't fix any of this, right? You can't band-aid Bitcoin over, everything burning down and all that, but you can start to introduce it to people as a prevention mechanism in times of, I agree. We shouldn't be out there like during the doom and gloom and saying, yeah, everything's burning by Bitcoin. That's not right. But we should be talking about Bitcoin as something that you should be, starting to look at because this stuff does happen, right? And it's happening in America. A lot of people have said, okay, this can't happen. We're not going to be authoritarian in America. America's land of liberty. I don't know how true that is anymore and for how much longer. I mean, Alex said we're being watched. We should assume we're being watched. Like that's what we, that's what we lived like in the Soviet Union. We knew we were being watched. We knew all letters were being censored, and people knew this, and they just lived their lives, and they just said, okay, yeah, we know we're being watched. Let's just be careful. But that's not like it's not a good way to live. We need to kind of like start talking about all these pieces of the toolkit that help us break out of that, rather than saying, yeah, this is what it is. And recognize this is a long-term endeavor, and it's not going to happen overnight.
Yeah, I mean, I think like we're about to enter a period here where education and awareness will be sorely needed. I think a lot of people are waking up to the fact that we can't just blindly like trust our leadership and like the systems that we rely on a daily basis. And I think a lot of people are going to wake up on the privacy side as well. Just in general, not even Bitcoin related, just encrypted messages, location tracking, all this stuff. If the government, which I expect them to, starts flexing their domestic surveillance capabilities, people are going to have their eyes wide open. For now, it's not very useful, but over the next couple of months, next year, next 5 years, like using that experience, using what people have learned from all of this to bring them to the next level, to help, increase our censorship resistance as a society, I think is super important.
Just to underline or qualify what I said earlier, Bitcoin as a tool is precisely that. It's a tool that people can use to achieve change. At least that's the way I like to look at it in one way. There's many ways to look at it, but you have many different protest movements out there which are trying to change the society on specific matters. In the United States right now, there are a lot of people angry for different things, but the specific matter is police brutality, qualified immunity, making sure that police officers can't kill, especially people in the Black community, with total impunity like they can now. That's like the very specific thing that we're dealing with. In Hong Kong, it's very different. They don't want their city turning into a Chinese city. They want to see Hong Kong courts and laws preside over Beijing's courts and laws, right? So in Sudan, we're on the 1-year anniversary of a movement that brought down a brutal dictator who ruled Sudan for decades. And there are still people who are upset because a lot of people in his regime went unpunished, right? So regardless of where you are in New York City, in Khartoum, in Hong Kong, there are different reasons why people are upset. But in order to protest, you need a toolkit. You need to understand how to protest effectively. And I think that over time, we'll get a greater understanding of why encrypted messaging and why maybe not just bringing your phone with you without tweaking it slightly, for example, is a good idea. Maybe like why you should be more private on the internet, things like that. At the same time, I think you're going to see hopefully an increased awareness of why, certain financial transactions you're going to want to keep private. And we saw this last summer in Hong Kong where citizens lined up in huge queues to buy subway tickets with cash with masks on so that no one could know that they were going to go protest, right? So in an urban environment to protest, you need to use public transportation and you don't want to get spied on. If they had used their traditional octopus card, right, a lot of them would have had their location history of where they got off at a particular protest point linked to their identity. And therefore, a lot of people were going to get fired or punished at school, right, for students. So they were smart and they lined up in queues and wore masks and used cash to buy these transit cards, which allowed them to exercise their rights and keep their government accountable. Well, in 20 years, they won't have paper money. There won't be any cash, probably. As much as I love cash, won't exist. So Bitcoin is going to be an increasingly important tool in that tool set. But again, I think it's important to view as a tool that people can use in whatever struggle they're fighting, would be the way I'd like to look at it.
Yeah, I also think of it as a tool for escaping that environment, right? I mean, there's a lot of reasons why people can't escape a country, not just financial, but a lot of times it does come down to the financial aspect where, like, if you leave, you won't be able to keep your wealth because of capital controls, or if in order to leave, you need to bribe somebody, and you can't bribe them in the local currency because nobody wants it because it's broken, Like those kinds of situations is where Bitcoin can be a tool for actually exporting people out of a country that's so broken that it's no longer fixable. And by draining that country of human capital, that's how we actually defeat that, authoritarianism or dictatorship that might be going on there, is by actually letting people escape. That's something that people can't do a lot of times in the world because they don't have money that they're free with. And as Alex said, and I totally agree with, money is going to be entirely digital, whether it's this generation or the next one. It's going to happen. And at that point, like it's goodbye to any kind of financial freedom. So Bitcoin will become a very important part of that toolkit. And it will be too late if you have to get Bitcoin at a time where everything's already locked down, exchanges are completely illegal in your country, all that kind of thing. You need to be getting it while it's still not on anybody's radar. So it is an important preventative part of that toolkit for the future.
Absolutely, yeah. We got a lot into privacy there. A lot was mentioned on privacy, and I wanted to dive in and discuss that in a bit more detail. Matt, I'll start with you. What privacy attack vectors are you most worried about in this particular situation?
And just to, this is also tangential with this, just to add to what was just said, is not only getting Bitcoin or learning about privacy, it's learning how to use it properly while you still have the ability to learn it properly. When it's the heat of the moment, when you absolutely need something, it's way more difficult to actually educate yourself on proper usage and best practices. I mean, if we're talking about right now in these protests, I mean, right now they're flying DEA and border patrol planes, both little planes and drones that are taking images that are basically, they're these mobile stingray devices. I think they call them dirt boxes when they're on a plane, but the idea is that it's a fake cell tower, so it can lock into cell signals. So even if you have location services off on your phone, they can still figure out where people are and who's participating in the protest based off of their phone signal. So best practice is just not to have your phone on you. So it's going to be really interesting, and most people aren't. And it's kind of goes back and forth because you really want to see footage out there, more accountability in general. We want to see more accountability in general, both for rioters and police brutality. And so you want the cameras out there, but most people's cameras are their phones. So if they do have this, it's you should be on airplane mode. The other thing is we see tons this is the first real American crisis for me, where 99% of my information is coming in through social media. It's not coming in through professional photographers. It's coming in through people's cell phone cameras, Periscope, and uploaded after the fact and whatnot. And you see tons of people's faces and all this different information. And that information, once you post it on the internet, Barbara Streisand learned this, once you post it on the internet, it's there forever. They're gonna, if they come down, if the US government comes down hard here, they're gonna have so much information at their disposal to hit people after the fact. So we got location, we have just general social media unawareness, people posting on social media, I'm going to this protest at this time, I'm going to this, that, pictures, tons and tons of pictures that they're uploading. And then last but not least is the communication side of things. Hopefully more people will be using Signal now, which is pretty secure. It doesn't have any major vulnerabilities that we know about. So hopefully more people start using Signal. And I think if you're sending plain text messages, or if you're, Telegram messages or plain text, Instagram DMs, Twitter DMs, you're coordinating through those kind of things, you're going to get screwed. It's more likely than not get screwed. It's a really, really messy situation. The light at the end of the tunnel here is, the I have nothing to hide crowd is about to realize that they had a lot to hide. They're about to realize the importance. When you need it, no one needs to explain to you why privacy is important. You immediately realize. And when you need Bitcoin, no one needs to explain it to you. They just say, how do I use it? How do I get some? there's no explanation required. The explanation comes down to what are the best practices? How do I use this properly?
Yeah, I think I want to say two things in the area of being realistic and being hopeful. Being realistic, the difference in a lot of ways between a society like China's and a society like the United States, both have a lot of surveillance, but one has a lot more censorship, right? So it remains to be seen how effective we can be fighting surveillance. I think there are things that people like Matt are doing, creating guides to help people evade surveillance and use open source software to even have a phone that's harder to track, harder to pin to your identity. You can use Bitcoin in a way that makes it harder to pin to your identity. You can use encrypted messaging in a way that's harder to pin to your identity. But a lot of that takes intentionality. And yeah, it'll be great if like a subset of the population can get there. That's the goal. That's what we want, what we need. But to be realistic, the real difference is in censorship. And like, again, in China, the George Floyd video doesn't cause a massive countrywide reaction in the same way as it does here. And even when you have a moment like in China with Dr. Li Wenliang, who was a martyr, right, who tried to blow the whistle on COVID in China and was detained and sanctioned instead. People in China did creatively learn about that and find ways to express themselves, but they couldn't go out in the streets and protest, right? So, to be realistic, I think we need to be a little hopeful and understand that we still have opportunities that a lot of people elsewhere in other societies don't, and we need to exercise these rights. And it's actually just, again, it's amazing to see millions of people out on the streets in rejection of an obviously corrupt and unfair police system, and in rejection of a current administration that seems to care less, right? That wants to have a photo op and is willing to tear gas people to get them out of the way so they can have a photo op. Like, people are going to be angry about this, and you're probably going to see some change, which again is different from a closed society. Like in Minneapolis, in the state of Minnesota is now opening an investigation into the police department. That's not happening in China, right? So you hopefully you're going to see cops arrested. You've seen several arrested already. You're going to see more. Like, that's what we need to push for. And we have the tools to do that. And people are brave and they're out there and they're pushing. And, we can push our country in a certain direction, but we have to understand that in other societies, that's not how it works. And they don't have the same rights as we do. And they're kind of stuck. So that's why the open source tech is so important, is regardless of what the Chinese government does, they can't really keep their people off Bitcoin long term, regardless of how oppressive they are. It's just too much that you can keep your people off of sharing the events that will happen 31 years ago tomorrow of Tiananmen Square, because why would people risk everything to start talking to their friends about Tiananmen? It's not worth it. But if you're sitting there in China and your standards of living are going down over the next decade slowly, and you've seen this other asset that you've heard people talk about, which is going up, you're going to risk for that, right? So I do think at the end of the day, the open source, permissionless, borderless nature of Bitcoin will create problems for even the most intense police states around the world.
Yan, you want to comment on privacy? Advice for people, thoughts on, how important it is, especially right now, to fight for even just some basic privacy.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I can say anything better than that. I will defer to him on that. I will say, and I will comment again on coming from, again, I was an immigrant from the former Soviet Union, and it was known that all letters coming out of the Soviet Union, this was before email, obviously, but all letters were read. Okay, so we had to send letters to America to try to get somebody to basically volunteer to sponsor us to get us immigrated. We had to write coded letters to people, in order to give them private information. So I agree with Alex. We're in a society which is way different, and that's great. America is way different than China. It's way different than the former Soviet Union. We do have liberty in a sense. I think we're pushing, the society is morphing in potentially bad ways, but we still have the option and the ability to change it. And I agree with Matt. Privacy isn't important until it is. And, I'm lazy, right? Like I don't always use my VPN. I don't always coin join, right? I don't do these things because I'm privileged. I live in the suburbs of Chicago. Nobody's rioting here. I'm not worried about the government really coming to take away my money. And I recognize that I live in a luxurious and like privileged circumstance, which is not the case for a lot of people across the world, as well as in some places in America. So I agree. You have to start learning about this stuff before it becomes relevant, before it becomes a matter of actually, importance. So you have to learn about hygiene and keeping yourself private and secure as much as you can. It is very difficult in a world of social media to resist posting pictures and then forgetting that you posted a picture of yourself at some location. Now with AI, we can tell where it is, very easy. It's definitely an issue. So keep vigilant.
I've got a question from the chat. Again, that's t.me/swan signal. You can hop in there, ask questions. We've got a conversation going. This is from mbit in the chat. Matt, we'll start with you on this one too. What advice would you guys give to Bitcoin companies trying to balance maximizing customer privacy, staying compliant with local regulations, user experience? Of course, this is in the shadow of the BlockFi hack last week.
And then there was also the one in Canada, the CoinSquare one recently. First of all, I would never run a business that needed to deal with the fiat banking system and all the regulations that come along with it.
It sucks.
That is intentional. That is, so I do feel for people that are trying to do their best while staying compliant. I think it's rather simple. Like, first of all, you need to make it a fucking priority. Like, your users' privacy, you're their custodian of your users' privacy. They're trusting you with intimate private details that you are being forced to collect. So first of all, you should take as little information as absolutely required of you. The second thing is you should fight for user privacy on the regulatory front. If regulators are pushing and saying, we should be flagging coin joins, you shouldn't be doing that and stuff. You're making money off your customers. Put some of that money towards lobbying, towards trying to make those rules not as overbearing as they are becoming. The third thing is, actually value that information, because it is valuable. Like, your marketing personnel, your salespeople should not have access to these intimate details. Like, one of the things that's lost in the BlockFi thing is, yes, it's an absolute joke that their salesperson was using SMS two-factor, which is pretty much, everyone agrees, is an insecure method for securing, important information. But the real question is, why did he have access to that information in the first place? Why is a customer of BlockFi supposed to trust some random ass dude who's not a high ranking person at BlockFi with all of this intimate details? Blows my mind. So if you don't want to do it out of the goodness of your heart, that's fine. But me and a lot of other people are going to flip shits if something happens. So just consider that. You're just going to hurt your business long term.
Yeah, I actually debated the founder of Elliptic a couple of days ago. And I think for companies in the space, they should reject this idea that they need to have chain analysis or they need to buy contracts with these chain analysis companies. And if we get down this road, where we're not right now, but like in the future, where some alphabet soup agency says, no, you have to, then, take them to court. Like let's get this to the Supreme Court. Like, does a Bitcoin company need to spy on its users and de-anonymize them in order to function? I'd like to see the Supreme Court actually look at that with regard to the First and Fourth Amendment. So don't back down on this. And there's a good chance that the right side of privacy and freedom actually wins out in the end, given I think just our Constitution in the United States and the sympathies in many ways of the people who sit on the Supreme Court. The odds that something that is protective of free speech and privacy may win out may surprise you. I mean, they may actually reject this idea that we need more surveillance. They've done it before. The EFF has sued the U.S. government, and other organizations and people have sued the U.S. government, and their surveillance state has been beaten back in different areas. It's not always just this inexorable trend. Like, people have had victories. So if you're a company, you should look into this and hire the right lawyers and, fight back. That's my advice to you. And you'll gain a lot of respect for doing so.
Jan, you're in the trenches on this, man, building products at, a Bitcoin company that deals with the legacy banking system and all the laws that come along with that here in the United States. Talk about your experience on Swan.
Yeah, I mean, I agree that. So, I wish I could not do this, right? But I also think it's important to onboard Bitcoiners. And so it's a fine line between, just not doing something because you never want to touch private information, versus trying to get people, let's remember what we're doing here. We're trying to get people off of that legacy system into a new one, right? In this new system, once they're on Bitcoin, they're on Bitcoin. Okay. So as Bitcoin evolves and becomes more private and all that kind of stuff, they're getting the benefits of that. The on-ramps, for the most part, are highly regulated. Now, there are things like BISC or whatever. There's peer-to-peer exchanges, which, for the most privacy concerned people, they should be doing that kind of thing. But, unfortunately, we have to collect customer information. And I agree with Matt 100%. It shouldn't be like every random Joe Schmo in your company that touches it. It should be the minimum amount kept. For example, we collect social security numbers because we're required to do so in order to open trust accounts, but we don't store them. As soon as we open the trust account, we delete that information. So it's best practices stuff, right? Don't keep information that, if you have information, it will eventually be released. And obviously don't feed it into your marketing system. I mean, I don't know why a marketing system would need to have people's addresses in it. But some of them do. So I agree with all of that. And I also agree with Alex in the sense that we should be constantly fighting these regulations. Now, we are unfortunately too young and too small to do anything about it yet. But as we grow, I absolutely think that, once we have the resources, that we would commit to such fights whenever possible. And, there's a lot of bad stuff in the financial system that's not even Bitcoin related, like the Bank Secrecy Act and all this other stuff. It's been around for a long time and it's highly entrenched.
But I guess what I was saying is the regulations are one thing. I mean, you got to abide by them or lobby to change them. But the idea that you need to hire a chain analysis company is not a law. Like,
and by the way, we don't do any chain analysis.
Right. And that's awesome. But like a lot of companies have caved to this because of a slick presentation that they saw, some PowerPoint that these guys gave. And these guys are now walking around saying that Bitcoin's success is because of them, because of chain analysis. Total bullshit.
Chain analysis is a very temporary thing. I think as the coin joins and other types of technologies like that evolve, chain analysis is going to become less and less usable, and it will eventually, fall off.
But it's dangerous because if you're a big bank and in the next, put Silvergate to the side for a second. If you're, but someone like them, let's say you're the next Silvergate or somebody 5 years down the road, and you want to get involved in this space, you're going to get this presentation by these guys, and it's going to be pretty compelling because, unless you have the privacy argument and someone can explain to you why this is important, why wouldn't you hire them? Great, it'll just make us look safer, So this actually really needs to be discussed in those rooms, in those corporate rooms, I mean, Matt, what are do you feel like that's possible? Like who can do that?
I think you're a perfect candidate for it, Alex.
Do they want to hire me?
The elliptic debate isn't out yet, right?
I think I have to check. Yeah, I mean, it was live, but I'll see if they can have the video of it.
Forward to it.
Yeah, no, you should also just listen to. I think Peter McCormick did a good job in his interview with Levin, the guy from Chain Analysis. But it's look, I agree with Jan. They're sort of temporary problem. Like their business model is unique to this milieu of Bitcoin as it is today. And in 10 years, obviously it will be very different, but they'll shift and pivot to something, equally bad.
I mean, look, I want to hope that's the case, that we make their business model outdated. I think that's the way you fight these companies, not with complaining and asking them to morally not do it, because if they don't do it, someone else will do it. But if you look at our society today, I mean, it is just corporate surveillance all the way down. And that's what we should call these chain analysis companies. They're surveillance companies. They don't just surveil the chain. They run nodes, they surveil people, they do all this other stuff as well, that they combine all the data together. So they're just surveillance companies. And the ad tech business, it's just a surveillance companies. That's what they're doing. Every charge you make on your credit card, every drive you take with your phone in the car, every message you send on a platform that doesn't protect metadata, which is pretty much every platform, Like, all of this is hoovered up, and it's part of the corporate surveillance machine, and it's mixed in with government surveillance, and these databases are all over the place. They're secured horribly, like completely insecurely, and they're waiting to use them against their will, and that's how they make money. So to expect them to go away anytime soon, I think, is extremely optimistic. We just, but I try to stay optimistic. So I think that we can make strides on a personal level to at least make it more expensive to do this kind of surveillance on a mass scale. If you're a single person and you have a sophisticated actor, you will be owned. Well, but hopefully not cheaply on a mass scale.
Here's why Bitcoin makes things different in two aspects. For years, the Human Rights Foundation has been doing campaigns against PR companies that work for dictators. And all we can really do is moralize, because there's always going to be people willing to do PR for dictators. Like, this is just the case, right? Or for surveillance companies, or for weapons industry, or whatever. You can choose your particular poison. But Bitcoin's a little different, because not only can we moralize, and we need to do more of that, and I'll do what I can to do that. I think it's important, and sometimes it works, obviously. But we can also build technology that makes what they're working on ineffective. And obviously that's the real hope here. Along the same lines, I was in a conversation earlier today where I was discussing with somebody in Germany, and we were agreeing that most people don't care about privacy right now. And maybe that never changes, right? And most people are willing to trade off their privacy for freedom and for convenience and comfort and speed and things like that. But the interesting thing about Bitcoin is and obviously I didn't come up with this, someone else did, I can't remember, but it's like a privacy wolf in sheep's clothing, right? Because all these people, governments, corporations, investors, see Bitcoin as a speculative, shiny asset to invest in. They just want to make money. They don't give a shit about privacy. But the more that the Pauls, right? The more these people get involved, and I think increasingly over the next decade they will. And again, they don't even care. They probably don't even have exposure to real Bitcoin. They probably just have some security, right? But they don't care. They're just trying to make money. But the funny thing is, their greed strengthens our ability to use this really interesting tool. So I'm a little optimistic, because I think things are slightly different with Bitcoin, because there's this kind of extra angle whereby it doesn't matter if you don't care about privacy. You're not going to want Bitcoin for privacy or for cypherpunk reasons unless you're Matt Odell, right? You're going to want it because you're going to want to get rich, okay? But we're going to take that greed and we're going to turn it into strength, which is not really something you can do with very many other things. So it's going to be interesting to watch.
Let's turn back to the situation here in the United States and dive into a question that I am personally curious about. Let's kind of game out where we think the administration, the Trump administration, is sort of headed. What moves do you think they're preparing for? I know that we have a recent Executive Directive 51. It was signed into law by George W. Bush in 2007. And it allows for the executive office to declare a catastrophic emergency, which they define as any incident, regardless of location, that results in extraordinary levels of mass casualties, damage, or disruption severely affecting the United States population, infrastructure, environment, economy, or government functions. Do you think we're headed for some kind of emergency declaration like this that would expand greatly the executive power?
Oh, well, I'll just put on the table that it may not be in a big press conference. It may not be the president saying, "Oh, we're under martial law" or whatever. I think it's going to be these things that are a little more secret that we have to actually read about to understand. Like, for example, on Sunday, the Drug Enforcement Agency, the DEA, received approval for 14 days for 2 weeks to conduct covert surveillance and act as federal law enforcement with regard to protests around the nation. So obviously this is a very specific agency that's supposed to deal with, arresting people for breaking the law with regard to drugs. And all of a sudden they've been empowered to spy on people for a completely different topic, which is like civil rights protests. So I think you're going to see a lot more of this sort of thing. And that's kind of what I would be worried about, is the like sort of the metastasizing of these different agencies and their employment in fighting, relatively peaceful protests around the nation, whether it's the National Guard or the DEA or whatever?
The short answer is yes. It's going to get a lot worse before it gets better.
Yeah.
I try and maintain my optimism, but when people are scared, when there's fear, it's when it's super easy to get things passed, when it's super easy to escalate their powers, their capabilities, their legal capabilities. We saw Trump basically strip the protections of social media companies, setting the gears up for censorship through basically liability, which should be very common for people in America to relate to. I mean, the way they enforced the lockdowns was basically the Corona lockdowns. They enforced it through liability. They weren't, if you kept your store open and someone got hurt in that store, your insurance wasn't going to cover shit. So we saw that. No one really talked about it, right? Because everything else is going on. So no one really talks about it. We see the DEA thing. They're flying dirt boxes. That's what we talked about earlier. These little planes with these fake cell towers on it to track American citizens and their location. We have National Guard on and now we hear talks about military coming in. We have police officers with their body cameras off. We have their badge numbers covered. We have,
I saw that. Yeah.
I just, the amount of power that a dedicated few individuals can take here is astounding. Like, we need to be very careful and we need to be very vigilant, because this could get way worse really quickly. Like, we need to be very, very careful.
Do you think that, or are you concerned about, as the government sort of increasingly overreaches here, do you think that there might be a crackdown on Bitcoin or Bitcoiners, since we're sort of aligned with the ideas of, freedom and separation of money from state, et cetera?
Yes.
I think we're pretty far down on their priority ladder, though. I mean, we're not the ones on the street throwing rocks, generally speaking. We're kind of like, we're a problem, but we're a quiet problem right now. Mm-hmm. And that's a good thing. Lets Bitcoin kind of develop, an immune system slowly.
I mean, I think there's two outcomes ultimately. One is that governments, they attack and try to kill the Bitcoin ecosystem. Obviously, the Chinese government tried to do that in 2017. Didn't really work out so well. But the equally likely, or possibly even more likely outcome, is that they try to stockpile Bitcoin. I mean, and they try to get more than they're in a rivalrous atmosphere with other countries that are also looking at this. That just seems much more likely to me from a game theory perspective. It's not like Germany, Belarus, and Lithuania are going to sit there and sit down with Putin and say, let's figure out how to get rid of Bitcoin. No, Putin's going to be like, fuck you guys, I'm getting some. And then Germany's going to be like, oh shit, we have to get some. Like, that seems much more likely to me in a rivalrous world than this outcome of like governments uniting to destroy it. I mean, they, as you're saying, guys, they have bigger fish to fry to begin with.
They could do both, though.
They could do both with gold, right? They've like tried to limit what citizens can do with gold while stockpiling it for themselves, but that's going to be a lot harder with Bitcoin.
We're like, if in the worst case scenario, we're like 2 steps away from that happening to Bitcoin in America. I mean, I don't support Antifa, but they were labeled a terrorist organization this week. A bunch of American citizens were labeled a terrorist organization. They now all of a sudden have no rights. There's definitely insane surveillance going on with them. There's a bunch of retroactive stuff that people might have communications with them and stuff like that, where they're going to get wrapped up into this. We saw celebrities doing like bailouts and stuff, and they've publicly supported certain elements of that movement in the past. It should be interesting to see how that gets affected. So then with that, you ban their use of PayPal, you ban their use of banks, you ban their use of all this stuff. Bitcoin, all of a sudden, when there's no other option, Bitcoin is the option, right? And then all of a sudden, Bitcoin becomes a target, right? Bitcoin becomes the thing, and they say, you need to buy through KYC, you can't self-custody, you have to report every single Bitcoin you own, every single UTXO, every single address, you have to report it, otherwise you're breaking the law. Similar to what we see with guns. Where you have to get your guns licensed, you have to be on a list, all this other stuff. One of the things that people don't realize is this whole KYC versus non-KYC thing in the Bitcoiner community. You see it all the time in the gun community. Someone buys a gun, and then in the comments underneath, it's like, "Oh, did you buy that at a store? You're not really a gun owner. You bought that with KYC." So we could be a hair's throw. Like I really hope that's not the case. They, for the most part, have been distracted. For the most part, America has been decently good about this, but we don't have a good track record with financial privacy, and we have a president who shoots from the hip. So I'm concerned. I'd be lying if I said I was not concerned here.
Yeah, well, China would be the canary in the coal mine for other societies, right? Like the world's biggest police state has, let's put it this way, de facto, Bitcoin is definitely not illegal. From what I understand, it's legally protected property, and you can't do certain things with it. Like you're not really supposed to be, exchanging it via RMB. If you're a bank or a company, there's different restrictions, but like it is very widespread there, and increasingly so. And you look at the volume on some of these exchanges like Huobi or whatever, it's totally nuts. I mean, we're talking billions of dollars a day from retail customers and individuals. And then you have all this OTC action. Like, I don't know. I'm with you, Matt. Like, I'm worried about it. We should definitely be vigilant, but I just think it's going to be hard, no matter how sophisticated the police state is, to root this thing out, simply because of the fact that it's not just like a Wikipedia page on the internet. It's like an asset that you can own and can become more valuable. So I do think it'll be a lot tougher for governments to get rid of.
I think the game
there's
theory is
different
also
things here, right? There's criminalization of the user base is different than enforcement. Right. If you push people into the shadows, you make them have to watch their back. You stifle the innovation of companies like Swan and stuff like that. Like that's more of what I'm saying. Like I don't think there's the capability to go in and first of all, pull Bitcoin for people who are self-custodying and try and block transactions and like attack the network and stuff. I don't think they have the will to do it. They might have the capability, but I don't think they would actually go that far. But they could easily criminalize like self-usage of Bitcoin. Just like the act of using it just makes you have to be careful, and makes you kind of a criminal.
Yeah, but I think there's a First Amendment issue here, which is what happened, if you guys remember the PGP situation, where, strong crypto was illegal to export, and then they printed it into a book, right? This is the same thing with Bitcoin. I mean, a Bitcoin transaction can be a text message. It could be a bunch of emojis. It could be printed into a book. So now you go to the Supreme Court with that. And now you really, what is the difference between me sending a Bitcoin transaction versus a message? I agree. And I think we are well set up for these alphabet soup agencies to try and do stuff, and then people sue them, and then the Supreme Court possibly having a favorable outcome. That's all I gotta say. I think there is a chance of that. And also I think the game theory is not in their favor for trying to do any kind of ban, because if they do go ahead and ban it, and criminalize it, and then it's not dead, it's not going to die. I mean, it's obviously not going to die. So what have they shown is that they're just ineffective, and they've shown this with the drug war, and look what's happening with that, right? They're easing up, right? Marijuana is becoming legalized all across the nation. And why is that? It's because they're kind of giving up, and they're kind of like, it's not an effective war. We fought it for too long. Now, could that last for 25 years with Bitcoin? It could, but it's going to be a very ineffective war if they couldn't fight.
Well, also, Yan, like if the government started being restrictive here, you guys, I mean, not like you'd want to, but you'd have the option to. You could go to Israel or Taiwan or Malta or any of these other places.
There's jurisdictional arbitrage.
And those countries are going to be like, hell yeah, we'll take the entrepreneurs in the capital. Of
course.
And it's not going to be this world where like all 180 countries or whatever one day decide we're all going to criminalize citizen use of Bitcoin without KYC. Yeah. That's not happening. So we'll have to see how it goes. But definitely we got to be vigilant.
Yeah. I mean, we just have to make like the incentive structures and what you said, right? It's more profitable to acquire something than to try to criminalize it. As long as we keep going in that direction, I think we will be headed in the right direction.
Yeah, absolutely. This is a tangential question from the Telegram chat room posed by Al's Lacrosse, Marty and Matt's nemesis. So what do you guys think would have to happen in the United States for some sort of right to financial privacy? like a law that would give the right to financial privacy to citizens, does the legal principle eventually follow from the technical reality, making it easier to transact privately? Alex, you want to start?
Yeah, and I think Coin Center does a good job explaining this, but we already have the right. It's already in our Bill of Rights. It's like the First Amendment and the Fourth Amendment. So that's all I got to say about that.
Yeah, but there's stuff like, the Bank Secrecy Act and things like that that have been upheld and are forcing the collection of all this private info. And so there is surveillance that's in violation of, our right against unreasonable search and seizure is happening. So it's like those two things are conflicting in some way.
I will actually say that's important. So the Bank Secrecy Act was designed with like a lower bound limit, like below $10,000 or whatever. We don't have to declare or whatever. And that's actually really important because if you want to fight a big brother-esque surveillance state, what they want to do is they want to understand all your micro transactions. I mean, if you buy a house, that doesn't really help Big Brother. What they want to do is know where you're going all day and what you're doing and what you're buying. They want to develop a pattern of your daily life so that they can like engineer you, right? So actually, if like as bad as the legacy laws are, if they can be roughly mapped, like for Bitcoin, for example, this wouldn't be the worst case outcome if like only Bitcoin transactions above a certain amount, you had to divulge some sort of KYC. That would not be the worst outcome in the world. It would not, as long as it's like we have a very healthy, anything you could conceivably buy in your daily life, like medical procedure, a book, a service, whatever. If you didn't have to divulge for that, but only for really large items, like I could live with that. I feel like
but it's very hard to do something like that with Bitcoin. I think you'd have to go like all in or all out.
Well,
like,
you need the lawyers and lobbyists to point out that why change the rules for just a new kind of money? Like we should use the same legal. I mean, we have this legal and moral precedent that cash is totally fine to use for stuff up to a certain amount. So we just need them to really, and groups like Coin Center to keep doing what they're doing and pushing this idea that that's an American value. We should be able to buy and sell and transact below a certain amount privately. And let's keep it like that. There's no reason to change the, decades old traditions we have here in America just because money's changing would be the hope, right?
Yeah, but I mean, I think as we've gone to a digital society and digitized all of our payment methods, we've kind of implicitly opted into surveillance, even though, like Apple and PayPal and whatever, these are not government entities, but they're obviously keeping records on every transaction. Right. And if the government asks them, they're going to divulge it. So it's like,
well, but this is like what you just pointed out with PGP. Like if they go down that road and they say, screw it, we don't care about the legal and moral precedent, we're going to change it anyway. Well, the PGP people were like, no, you're not. I'm still going to communicate with that person privately. Yeah. So, there's an additional, with this open source encrypted technology, there's like an additional barrier for authorities. They can't just scrap tradition. If they try to, they will have to fight. And it's going to be really hard for them to do so. Yeah. So this is like an additional protection for citizens, basically.
You have any thoughts you want to share on that? Yeah, go ahead.
I don't have that much faith in our institutions, but I'll be hopeful with you. Hopefully we get something like the de facto with cash, but I do see cash slowly slipping away.
Right.
And this subject, I find myself self-censoring myself on this subject all the time because I'm scared of the repercussions. And I'm not proud of that, but that says a lot about this country. And it's not, it's not great in terms of financial privacy. It's not great. Cash is great, but my peers, no one uses cash anymore. It's like almost de facto criminalized because you use it. And it's like, why? Why are you using it? Why aren't you using Venmo or whatever? Why aren't you using credit card?
Cash is an app now.
Cash App, sponsor the podcast, disclosure.
Yeah, no, we kind of lost this thread a little bit with what's now happening. But during the sort of COVID stimulus discussions, let's say a month ago, there's a lot of steam growing. And I think a lot of the people pushing these ideas that I'm about to mention may be in like a Biden cabinet, actually, or they may have a lot of influence in, let's say, a Biden administration, which could easily happen. They're pushing for basically, this is like a lot of these MMT folks are pushing for something that I don't necessarily think would be worse than the existing system, which is that you'd basically have like a savings account with the Fed and a checking account with the Treasury, and that your stimulus would come to you immediately. And that you'd have like a slightly more private, digital, CBDC like checking account to spend stuff on. And, while I think that that's still problematic for obvious privacy reasons and things like that, it's probably better than what we have now, where we have to it takes weeks to get a stimulus check, right? So this is what all these central banks want to do on some level, is they want to digitalize this ridiculous process. And the Chinese are going to be probably the first to do it. And of course, it's going to come with horrible violations of our civil liberties, which is why Bitcoin's important. But it is going to be easier for them to conduct these big operations. Like, it'll be easy for the Chinese government, if they have DCEP, to just put a stimulus in the pockets of a particular industry to quell protests or whatever.
It's going to be the carrot that digitizes all the money, right? Because they're going to say, you want your stimulus check? That's fine.
Yeah.
Just go here to this website and sign up.
Yeah, people will be like,
now
fuck
your money
yeah.
is digital. Everybody's going to opt into it immediately.
So I think we've lost that conversation a little bit, given the more urgent nature of what's happening now. But over the next couple of years, I think you're going to see a real push for this, especially as a populist backlash against the way that the bailouts currently work, which are fucked, obviously. But it may gain a lot of support and sympathy from a lot of different people. And we have to be aware of the second order effects of this.
Yeah. And, you can't use digital payment systems to buy cannabis here in Illinois, and it's legal. It's state legal, right? Can't use Apple Pay, can't use credit cards, as far as I know. So the question is, once everything does go digital, what other things are then labeled as non-savory? Can't use your digital money on this. Hope you still have some greenbacks from back in the day, because otherwise, sorry. Because that's the thing that I'm worried about. Cannabis is obviously okay, it's a luxury good. It's a medicine for some people. That's the kind of thing where you let the government just decide what you can and cannot buy. You're headed down a very bad road.
And it's not just the government, right? Because you buy the wrong thing, your health insurance goes up in price. Mm-hmm. You buy the wrong thing, you're not able to get that mortgage you want to get. It's a very slippery slope.
So what, in this time right now, this is kind of maybe some advice for people to navigating the situation that we're in right now, the pandemic, the civil unrest. It's hard to find, information that you can trust. I think we all have to make decisions about who to trust online. It's not really kind of handed down to us as it used to be, 50, 60 years ago, where we had a few, white men telling us what to, the arbiters of truth in newsrooms all over the country. What information sources are you guys trusting right now? Alex?
Yeah, you have to, I think as Matt is saying, we're getting most of our information from social media, at least people in our generation. And you know what? That's really helpful, because it allows us to relatively quickly sift through a lot of different perspectives, and it helps us hone our ability to see what's pretty legit and what's not. But yeah, I think when we're trying to do sense making now, we just want to, for me, I would want to look at a variety of the different sort of more respected institutions, see what they're saying, and then kind of look at what their critics are saying, and then try to make out what the truth is on my own. It's for certain things, it's highly unlikely that reporters at the New York Times or Wall Street Journal will lie, because they'll get fired. If there's fact checking, so there's a process. Now you could point out the whole WMDs in Iraq thing, which is very legitimate, and that's why you need to have a critical mind. But generally speaking, for day-to-day fact type stuff, if you're looking at the center left and center right magazines and newspapers of authority, you should have a pretty good idea of what's going on. And then you just got to do your own sense making there.
As many sources as possible.
Yeah, the more the merrier, and from different countries too. You want the East Asian perspective, the European perspective, the American perspective, etc. Yeah,
I think more primary sources. I agree that social media, I almost entirely stopped reading any kind of official publications. I occasionally will look at Google News as just a glance of everything that's going on. But Twitter and primary sources and being able to see and verify for yourself is important. It's also very difficult, right? You see 20,000 videos of these protests, and from one angle, the cops are shooting the guy, the other angle, the guy's being a dick. It's really hard to say who is right. And it takes time to sort through that. And so maybe there will be stuff in the future that helps you aggregate that information, for yourself.
Yeah.
And and look at
like
that.
right now, the president released a statement saying that they didn't tear gas anybody. It's like, clearly that's not true. And like, we can all see that, right? So
yeah, that's the thing, is like, I think the idea of these like statements and official media reports that then are totally discredited by firsthand source footage is really powerful. And I think that we'll see more. I'm hoping we see more platforms that actually aggregate it. And, I don't know how I feel about the whole fact checking thing on Twitter, but I like the idea of combining, here's an official story, or here's a story from a mainstream source. Here's 10 other viewpoints on that same story. So you can see for yourself,
Well, it's fine for now, maybe, but then, think about it, like what's going to happen when like Fortune or the New York Times has a story about Bitcoin that's obviously wrong, and they don't have a fact check. And then poor Matt over here has got his TFTC and he's getting labeled, so that's when we're going to be pissed, right?
Well,
Right.
Before they added the safe places to Twitter, we could just ratio them for the fact check, and now they can block their replies out.
Right.
It's like it was built into Twitter. I think personally, I've never got to. I wasn't part of the Jack interview when we had him on Tales from the Crypt, and I know he doesn't really have that much power at Twitter anymore. But I think all these social media companies, like the mistake they made was ever trying to get involved in the content. It should just be a dumb pipe. It should just come through chronologically, get rid of no algorithm, because the algorithm makes them liable for it as well, about the different engagement, how it's all coming. And if you give tools to the user, let them moderate it themselves, let them mute, let them block, let them subscribe to moderation lists. You could have the Red Cross can do one, Black Lives Matter can do one, all different, and you can subscribe to all the different lists you want to subscribe to, do it all yourself. If there's any illegal content, the police can just do good old fashioned police work, and end of story. And I think short of that, which is obviously not the way we're going, and now with these legal protections removed, so they're going to get the shit suit out of them. So they're going to start censoring even worse than ever before. We're already starting to see it escalate on Twitter, where they're cutting way more accounts. And I think it's because their lawyers are like, whatever Trump did there, like is going to be a lot worse for us. Is we're going to need to see platforms where people can't control them. They can't censor by design. And that's like the only way forward, but it's a long way off. We're not there yet.
Yeah, I think you made a very apt. By the way, we have IRC. IRC, I don't even know if it's censorable. Really, it's pretty decentralized. I grew up in IRC. I haven't been back in years, unfortunately, just too busy. But I grew up on IRC, and it was great because anybody could say whatever the hell they want. Nothing was. I mean, individual channels had their own moderators that were just people who wanted to have that channel. You don't like it, go somewhere else. I think we're going to see that model come back, especially if Twitter becomes more censorship oriented. And I agree with you. They should never have gotten into this game, but also their incentives are misaligned, because the algorithm is what drives engagement, and engagement is what drives customers to click on ads. And so if you're a platform that has to make money, then you have to have an algorithm.
I think
they
probably
should also have a paid model, but
I think in like 10 years, 20 years, we'll probably
don't want
look
to
back,
pay for shit.
We'll probably look back right now and say that this was kind of a golden age for Twitter. And maybe they can preserve as much of it as possible, but it just seems like it's going to be so daunting. But it works pretty well right now. I mean, it's certainly not perfect, but it is just incredible how easy it is to quickly figure out what's going on. And, rather than watching cable news, I can just have people just cut up all the best parts for me to watch, and I don't have to even ask them to do it. They do it.
Except for you don't know if they've applied their own bias to those cuts.
Yes, but it's easy for me to figure that out because I can look at other people's reactions, right? So with the right sense making, Twitter is a really powerful tool right now. And just be careful before you share anything. If you see a photo of a protest and it seems, you start to develop like a gut feeling about some of these photos. And then like, I've been doing this for years because I'm like, whether it's the like issue with the FARC in Colombia or Palestinians and Israelis or in Hong Kong, there's always like people saying, oh, one side is like biased or whatever. So I'm always looking very carefully at these stories and these photos. And usually when I have like a hunch about it and I dig in, there was something wrong with it, right? So just be a little careful about sharing images and photos and stuff without kind of trying to prove it yourself,
Yeah, my gut feeling is like if I feel really like outraged by something and I want to share it, then I look at that very closely, because it's usually the things that trigger a very strong emotional response are the ones that are designed to do so and are in some way misrepresentations of the truth. Like the other day, I saw that picture of a cop, like that looked like it was pointing his gun at a little girl, and Guy Swan retweeted and said, "Hey, look at this. If you look at how this is shot, it looks like this is a very long lens. They're off to the side. They're not really. Look where he's looking." And sure enough, it was totally not, not what it appeared on first glance. And you got to be careful of that stuff.
And then we throw in, the like deep faking technology and the era of deep faking that we're getting.
That's gonna be rough.
That's gonna mess with everyone.
Yeah, deep fakes are gonna be rough.
I'm looking forward to the first fake rabbit hole recap that someone makes. We have so many voice samples, just weeks and weeks of rabbit hole recap.
Oh, that'll be great.
Probably, I think the podcasters get hit first with the voice deep fakes.
Yeah, but then it's like we're gonna know it's not you because you're gonna be like shilling Filecoin or something.
Yeah, that's how we fight it, right? We build our reputations and
exactly
be able to trust us. So, all right, guys, we're at time here. Really want to thank you guys for joining us. It was some great takes, great information sharing today. Any last thoughts or words that you want to share before we end the live stream?
Yeah, I got one. I know we're all focused on protests in the United States, which is great and important. But tomorrow marks the 31st anniversary of the Tiananmen Square massacre in China, and Href is doing a 90-minute kind of live event that's kind of looking back, and we're going to have people who were there, eyewitnesses, plus survivors, plus folks who are Hong Kongers to discuss this and put this in context. Because this week, the new authorities in Hong Kong have basically said that they're not allowed to do a vigil or a celebration of Tiananmen or a memorial anymore for the first time in 30 years. So it's illegal now. It used to be the biggest one in the world with millions of people. And now the new authorities in Hong Kong have said you're not allowed to remember Tiananmen anymore. So it's very timely. And I know it's not exactly probably what's on everybody's minds right now, but, I think at the end of the day, all these struggles are a little interconnected, and it would be good to take some time out of your day tomorrow to think about Tiananmen and what it meant. So if you go to href.org, there's some info about that.
I just want to say that everyone should just be a good person, but just don't be an idiot, and just be kind, but just don't be naive about it either. Cheers.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it. Make sure you guys subscribe over at YouTube. You can subscribe to the podcast as well. If you missed the first half of this or whatever, joined us late, swansignalpodcast.com. We'll have the whole audio file there. So yeah, that's it. Check out swanbitcoin.com. Thanks, guys. Take care.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, guys.
Thank
See you later.